I know well what value my cousins place upon the old glass. I believe they think their luck would really go if anything happened to it." "Heaven forbid," I replied involuntarily. "It is a perfect gem of its kind." "I know, I know. I never saw Madame so excited and unreasonable about anything. She begged of me to use my influence to try and get my cousin to let her have it. When I assured her that it was useless, she looked more annoyed than I had ever seen her. She took up a book and pretended to read. I went and sat behind one of the curtains near a window. The next moment Mr. Lewisham was announced. He came eagerly up to Madame. I don't think he saw me. "Well," he cried, "any success? Have you secured it yet? If you have, we are absolutely safe. Has that child helped you?" I guessed that they were talking about me, and started up and disclosed myself. Madame did not take the slightest notice, but she motioned to Mr. Lewisham to come into another room. What can it all mean, Mr. Head? "That I cannot tell you, Vivian, but may I ask you one thing?" "Certainly you may." "Will you promise me to keep what you have just told me a secret from anybody else? I allude to Madame's anxiety to obtain the old goblet. There may be nothing in what I ask, or there may be much. Will you do this?" "Of course I will. How queer you look." I made no remark, and soon afterwards took my leave of her. Late that same evening, Antonia Pitsey received a note from Vivian, in which she said that Madame Kolucci, her mother, and herself were returning to town by an early train the following morning. The Delacours did not intend to come back to Frome Manor, but Madame would do so on Tuesday in order to be in time for the great ball. She was going to town now in order to be present at an early performance of For the Crown at the Lyceum, having secured a box on the grand tier for the occasion. This note was commented on without any special interest being attached to it, but restless already, I now quickly made up my mind. I would also go up to town on the following day. I also would return to Pitsey Hall in time for the ball. Accordingly, at an early hour on the following day, I found myself in Dufrayer's office. "I tell you what it is," I said. "There is some plot, deeper than we think, brewing. Madame took Frome Manor after the murder of Delacour. She would not do so without a purpose. She is willing to spend £10,000 in order to secure a goblet of old Venetian glass, which is one of the curios at Pitsey Hall. A man called Lewisham, who doubtless bears another alias, is in her confidence. Madame returns to town to-night with a definite motive. I have not the slightest doubt." "This is all very well, Norman," replied Dufrayer, "but what we want are facts. You will lose your senses if you go on building up fantastic ideas. Madame comes up to town and is going to the Lyceum, at least, so you tell me." "Yes." "And you mean to follow her to see if she has any designs on Forbes Robertson or Mrs. Patrick Campbell?" "I mean to follow her," I replied gravely. "I mean to see what sort of man Lewisham is. It is possible that I may have seen him before." Dufrayer shrugged his shoulders and turned away somewhat impatiently. As he did so, a wild thought suddenly struck me. "What would you say," I cried, "if I suggested an idea to force Madame to divulge some clue to us?" "My dear Norman, I should say that your fancies are getting the better of your reason, that is all." "Now listen to me," I said. I sat down beside Dufrayer. "I have an idea which may serve us well. It is, of course, a bare chance, and if you like you may call it the conception of a madman. Madame goes to the Lyceum to-night. She occupies a box on the grand tier. In all probability Lewisham will accompany her. Dufrayer, you and I will also be at the theatre, and if possible we will take a box on the second tier exactly opposite to hers. I will bring Robertson, the principal and the trainer of the new deaf and dumb college, with me. I happen to know him well." Dufrayer stared at me with some alarm in his face. "Don't you see?" I went on excitedly. "Robertson is a master of the art of lip language. We will keep him in the back of the box. About the middle of the play, and in one of the intervals when the electric light is full on, we will send a note to Madame's box saying that the cipher on the blank sheet of paper has been read. The note will pretend to be an anonymous warning to her. We shall watch her, and by means of Robertson hear, yes, hear what she says. Robertson will watch her through opera glasses, and he will be able to understand every word she speaks, just as you or I could if we were in her box beside her. The whole thing is a bare chance, I know, but we may learn something by taking her unsuspecting and unawares." Dufrayer thought for a minute, then he sprang to his feet. "Magnificent!" he cried. "Head, you are an extraordinary man. It is a unique idea. I will go off to the box office at once, and take a box, if possible, opposite Madame, or failing that, the best seats we can get. I only hope you can secure Robertson. Go to his house at once and offer him any fee he wants." This is detection carried to a fine art with a vengeance. If successful, I shall class you as the smartest criminal agent of the day. We both meet at the Lyceum at 7:45. Now, there is not a moment to lose." I drove down to Robertson's house in Brompton, found him at home, and told him my wish. I strongly impressed upon him that if he would help he would be aiding in the cause of justice. He became keenly interested, entered fully into the situation, and refused to accept any fee. At the appointed hour we met Dufrayer at the theatre door, and learned that he had secured a box on the second tier directly opposite Madame Koluchy's box on the grand tier. I had arranged to have my letter sent by a messenger at 10 o'clock. We took our seats, and a few moments later Madame Koluchy, in rose-coloured velvet and blazing with diamonds, accompanied by a tall, dark, clean-shaven man, entered her box. I drew back into the shadow of my own box and watched her. She bowed to one or two acquaintances in the stalls, then sat down, leaning her arm on the plush-covered edge of her box. Robertson never took his eyes off her, and I felt reassured as he repeated to us the chance bits of conversation that he could catch between her and her companion. The play began, and a few minutes past 10 in one of the intervals I saw Madame turn and receive my note, with a slight gesture of surprise. She tore it open, and her face paled perceptibly. Robertson, as I had instructed him, stood in front of me. His opera glasses were fixed on the faces of Madame and her companion. I watched Madame as she read the note. She then handed it to Lewisham, who read it also. They looked at each other, and I saw Madame's lips moving. Simultaneously, Robertson began to make the following report verbatim. "Impossible. Some trick. Quite safe. Goblet key to cipher tomorrow night." Then followed a pause. "Life and death to us. Signed, my name." There was another long pause, and I saw Madame twist the paper nervously in her fingers. I looked at Dufrayer. Our eyes met. My heart was beating. His face had become drawn and grey. The ghastly truth and the explanation were slowly sealing their impress upon our brains. The darkness of doubt had lifted. The stunning truth was clear. The paper which had defied us was a cipher written by Madame in her own name, and doubtless implicated her with Delacour's murder. Her anxiety to secure the goblet was very obvious. In some subtle way, handed down doubtless through generations, the goblet, once in the possession of the ancient Brotherhood, had held the key of the secret cipher. But tomorrow night was the night of the ball, and Madame was to be there. The reasoning was so obvious that the chain of evidence struck Dufrayer and me simultaneously. We immediately left the theatre. There was one thing to be done, and that without delay. I must catch the first train in the morning to Pitsey Hall, examine the goblet afresh, and tell Pitsey everything, and thus secure and protect the goblet from harm. If possible, I would myself discover the key to the cipher, which, if our reasoning was true, would place Madame in a felon's dock and see the end of the Brotherhood. At 10 o'clock the following morning I reached Pitsey Hall. When I arrived I found, as I expected, the house in more or less confusion. Pitsey was busily engaged superintending arrangements and directing the servants in their work. It was some little time before I could see him alone. "What is the matter, my dear fellow?" he said. "I am very busy now." "Come into the library and I will tell you," I replied. As soon as ever we were alone I unfolded my story. Hardened by years of contact with the world, it was difficult to startle or shake the composure of Leonardo Pitsey, and before I had finished my strange tale I could see from his expression the difficulty I should have in convincing him of the truth. "I have had my suspicions for a long time," I said in conclusion. "These are not the first dealings I have had with Madame Koluchy. Hitherto she has eluded all my efforts to get her within the arm of the law, but I believe her time is near. Pitsey, your goblet is in danger. You will remove it to some place of safety?" "Remove the luck of Pitsey Hall on the night when my boy comes of age?" replied Pitsey, frowning as he spoke. "It is good of you to be interested, Head, but really— Well, I never knew you were such an imaginative man. As to any accident taking place to-night, that is quite outside the realms of probability. The band will be placed in front of the goblet, and it is impossible for anything to happen to it, as none of the dancers can come near it. Now, have you anything more to say?" "I beg of you to be guided by me and to put the goblet into a place of safety," I repeated. "You don't suppose I would try to scare you with a cock-and-bull story. There is reason in what I say. I know that woman. My uneasiness is far more than due to mere imagination." "To please you, Head, I will place 2 of my footmen beside the goblet during the ball, in order to prevent the slightest chance of anyone approaching it. There, will that satisfy you?" I was obliged to bow my acquiescence, and Pitsey soon left me in order to attend to his multifarious duties. I spent nearly an hour that morning examining the